Once upon a time, my wife was making grilled cheese sandwiches, as we do in Wisconsin. My daughter, who was 3, was eager to help, so Kim gave her some bread, butter, and a dull knife. She said, "Why don't you butter the bread for us?" Then she gave her one instruction. She said, just butter one side. So she did. Nailed it. Okay, full disclosure, this is not the best way to make a grilled cheese sandwich, but I'll bet no one watching this even considered this as an option. That's because as we get older, our eyesight gets bad. We stop looking for new ways of doing things. We mistake molehills for mountains, and we miss opportunities right under our noses. Here's a great example. When you see this, what do you think? What do you see? If you're like most adults, you get a little panicky. You think about calling the weed guy to deal with this army of weeds that has taken over your yard. But if you're a kid, you see wishes, flowers for mom. It's one picture, 2 completely different perspectives. But which one is right? Well, technically they both are. But which one is a better filter through which to see life? Well, now that's a different question, isn't it? When I draw, especially portraits, I'll often draw them upside down. Although my wife thinks this is weird, there's a good reason for it. When I'm drawing someone's face, my brain will get lazy and I'll draw eyes and ears the way I think they're supposed to look, rather than how they look on this particular person. So flipping it upside down tricks my brain. No longer does it see a face, but just shapes and lines and values. So I draw those, and my portraits end up looking like the person I'm drawing. When you're stuck or feel like life is conspiring against you, sometimes it's not new ideas we need, but a new perspective. I've made a career out of fighting adultitis, a terrible condition that ruins lives and relationships. One of adultitis' best tricks is to affect your vision. It nudges you to see dead ends as endings, problems as roadblocks, and risks as reasons to stay put. Adultitis knows that changing the way you see changes everything. It's my hope that this talk will change the way you look at risk, success, failure, problems, other people, and most importantly, yourself. The best, most comprehensive way to change your life for the better is to change the way you see. The patron saint of this talk is Bob Ross. Remember Bob with his happy little trees and happy large afro? He was a dude who used television to teach people how to paint. But mostly amidst the dabs of alizarin crimson and Prussian blue, he taught us how to see. He taught us that mistakes are not failures, they're happy accidents. As an artist myself, there are times when a blob of paint drops from my brush or I accidentally smudge something I've been working on for an hour. My initial urge is to throw the whole thing away and start over. But Bob would say, "No, man, that's a happy accident. Maybe the sky is supposed to be that color. Maybe there needs to be a friendly bush right there." I'll tell you what, every single time when I lean into the accident, my painting always ends up better than my original vision. It's now kind of like a game for me. Anytime something goes sideways, I ask, now that this has happened, what does this make possible? Now, that doesn't mean that answers always come easily. This picture was taken on the first day of one of our Escape Adulthood summits. It was the first time I'd be offering up my oil paintings for sale. I was nervous because I wasn't sure if anyone would be willing to spend that much money on one of my paintings. Well, to my great delight, they did. And this was my first sale. I was so proud to put a little sold sign on it, which I found myself sneaking peeks at every 6 minutes. Later in the day, I heard a disturbance in the force. A group of paintings, including the one that was sold, had fallen from their easels. After an accidental bump, I calmly walked over to reposition them, but the calm gave way to nausea. This painting, the one I had sold for more money than I had thought possible, had fallen onto another easel, resulting in a 2-inch tear in the canvas. I was devastated and desperately tried to come up with a way to avoid having to refund the collector her money. But no way could I charge her for a ruined painting. Believe me, I really, really, really wanted to see this as a happy accident, but it seemed hopeless. Later, Jessica, the woman who bought the painting, approached me with an idea. She said, I noticed that some of your other paintings kind of have words on them. I was wondering if maybe you could just put some words over the hole and cover it up. Eureka! I suddenly saw a possibility. I took the painting home that night and I went to work. I patched up the hole, glued over some words, added a little swirl to tie it all together. It worked. I secretly placed it back on the stage the next day and waited for Jessica to arrive. Her double take was priceless. She shared that she'd taken some art classes in college and declared that the composition of this new version was even better than the first one. I actually agreed. She told me also that she spent a few years in New York City as a stand-up comedian trying to make it in the business, so the painting had even more meaning for her now. So now I ruin all of my paintings right after they're finished. Just kidding. Look, you don't get to experience life without some storms blowing through every now and again. But every storm brings with it a chance of awesome. Like the time our basement sprung a leak. It wasn't a full-on flood, but every time it rained, our carpet got wet. The problem was hidden behind some paneling and drywall. And a day with the humidifier on dried things out, but for a few years, every time it rained, I got this pit in my stomach. I imagined worst-case scenarios. Was there a crack in our foundation that would cost $1 million to fix? Was there mold growing back there? Would my kids die of mold cancer? Eventually, my handyman father helped me address the problem, and little crack in the concrete was easily fixed, but we were left with this unsalvageable carpet and paneling and trim that needed to be repaired. Eventually, Kim and I finally asked, what does this make possible? We looked at our basement with new eyes, and with a much smaller amount of money than I imagined, transformed it into a studio for me, an office for my wife, and a shared space that takes advantage of a fireplace we never used. It's become our favorite room in the house. All of the paintings you see in this presentation have come out of that studio, as I'm able to make bigger paintings without having to ruin the carpet. I often kick myself, though, because I could have had this room 3 years earlier, had I not been so preoccupied with avoiding the worst-case scenarios I'd concocted in my mind. Most of the fearsome tigers we're fighting are nothing more than house cats. Now, keep in mind, I'm not suggesting you become a Pollyanna, pretending that bad stuff doesn't happen. When our plans fail or disaster strikes and things don't turn out as we hoped, it's okay to feel the feels. It's okay to be frustrated and sad and angry. Grieving is healthy. What I am saying is that the more quickly we can pick ourselves up, say, okay, that sucked, but what does this now make possible, the better off we'll be. Becoming unexpectedly unemployed could be the spark that gets you to finally start that business. Becoming unexpectedly pregnant could be the source of your greatest joy. Becoming unexpectedly single could be the open door to a relationship beyond your wildest dreams. Becoming unexpectedly ill could be an opportunity to get closer to the most important people in your life. The people most likely to see silver linings are the ones looking for them. As I left the stage after a speaking engagement in Minneapolis, I received a call from my wife. She said that my dad had called an emergency family meeting for the very next day. But the next day was the only day I'd be home for a week, so it was gold. So I called my dad, who has a history of making bigger deals out of things than they are, and just wanted to see if maybe we could have the conversation over the phone or at least postpone the meeting a week. He said no. He didn't want to discuss this over the phone and really hoped I could be there tomorrow. Okay, so then I had 24 hours to play the worst case scenario game. The next day, my 3 brothers and our wives convened, exchanging notes. None of us had any idea what this was about, or even if it had to do with mom or dad. After what felt like a million years later, my parents pulled into the driveway, and in the passenger seat, it looked like my mother was wearing a white sweatshirt with the hood pulled up. Now, hoodies are standard fashion staple for teenagers and 20-somethings, but for 60-year-old women, not so much. Either mom was announcing her new rap album was about to drop, or something was seriously wrong with her. But when she emerged from the car, I could see she wasn't, in fact, wearing a hoodie, but a beekeeper outfit. Yep, you heard me right, a beekeeper outfit. And my dad, he was dressed head to toe as a bee. What exactly is the correct response in this situation, other than, what the hell? They walked into the house, we exchanged hugs, and they seemed upbeat. Eventually, my dad put a cardboard box on the coffee table, creating a makeshift lectern. On it, he taped a handmade sign. There was a smiley face and a frowny face, but the frowny face was crossed off. Underneath was written, "Stuff happens." Then he launched into a speech that covered all the adversity we'd faced over the years as a family and how we'd overcome them all. We were sitting at the edge of our seats thinking, would you get to the point, man? Then he said, went to the doctor a few weeks ago and they found something. It's cancer. With that, it felt like all of the oxygen just sort of escaped from the room. He continued, it's prostate cancer. They caught it early, the prognosis is good, and we already have a date scheduled for surgery. Slowly, hope started to return, and it was then that it occurred to me that I bet no one in the history of ever has told their family that they have cancer dressed as a bee. But my dad did, alongside his beekeeper in crime. So here's the backstory. It was October. My parents had gone to a Halloween party the night before. These were their costumes. And they decided to wear them again to, I quote, help take the sting out of the news. They had to drive 2 hours north from Illinois. They had to stop for gas along the way. And they ended up going through the Culver's drive-thru for lunch. I'm sure they still speak in hushed tones about the day a bee drove up to order a Butterburger. So I made this painting for my dad shortly thereafter as a bit of encouragement. He asked me if I'd be able to make it into pins or buttons. So I did, and like the things you wear. Since then, my dad, who is 7 years cancer-free, has handed these pins out to hundreds of people. People who he encounters who have cancer. People who know someone who has cancer. People who watched a movie one time in which one of the characters had cancer. He's like the guy at the marathon, handing out water to racers running by, which kind of makes sense to me because I'm certain that every one of us has been impacted by cancer in some way. And it's a marathon. You need all the faith and hope you can get. This is just his one little way of providing that. But his greatest legacy is the lesson he and my mom taught our family. I could sit here and say, you can't control what happens to you in life, but you can control how you react to it. Wouldn't mean nearly as much as seeing what it looks like lived out in real life. G.K. Chesterton said, an adventure is only an inconvenience rightly considered. An inconvenience is an adventure wrongly considered. Most unpleasant things that happen in our lives are truly inconveniences. Whether or not we view them as full-blown tragedies or unplanned adventures depends largely on what kind of glasses we are wearing. A few years ago, when I went to find a new pair of glasses myself, I was struggling. I wasn't happy with any of the choices. Nothing looked right. The sales associate named Matt told me something I'll never forget. He said that my plight was common. He said you get so used to seeing your face in a particular style of glasses that everything else just looks wrong. He assured me I'd eventually find something. Well, after about 30 minutes of trying on 24 pairs of frames, he was right. Trying to see with new eyes when you're so used to the old way feels awkward and contrived at first. After all, your old way of seeing has gotten really comfortable. Feels funky at first trying to convince yourself that losing your job or getting dumped by the person you thought was the one is a good thing. You might try that perspective on for a bit and it just seems off. That's because you're used to seeing things the old way. It's normal. Don't give up. Give it time. Eventually, you'll get used to this new pair of glasses and you'll wonder how you ever got along with those old ones. I have a friend who lost his eyesight in his 20s. Another became paralyzed in a farm accident, and yet another lost a leg to cancer when he was a kid. Events like these are indeed life-changing, but they're also rare. The other kind of events, the roadblocks, the setbacks, the molehills disguised as mountains, these kind of events pop up all the time, every single day. How we approach these more common events matters, because how we choose to perceive them can be just as life-changing. Problems are opportunities. So are torn canvases, wet basements, and cancer diagnoses. Changing the way we see really can change everything. So the next time a storm blows through your life, practice seeing with new eyes. Look for the good things it now makes possible. Do that, and you can expect a 100% chance of awesome.